everyone, my name is Josephine Lauren. I am an author and an activist, as well as the community organizer of Incest Aware. I am passionate about the anti-incest movement because I am an incest survivor, and I'll be sharing my story more here. So my childhood was really complex. Not only was I incested by a number of men in my family, but I also had grand mal seizures, as well as a digestive disease that required me to have a surgery at a very young age. As we know now, incest already is a horrible developmental trauma, but also seizures can cause brain damage, and then an unhealthy gut can also cause difficult mental health. So I have this kind of trifecta of challenges in my childhood that really made my adult life debilitating. So when I was 18, I moved from home and immediately started having a lot of health problems. By 22, I could hardly function, and I had no idea why. I knew that I had surgery and I knew that I had seizures. My mother had shared these stories with me that I had forgotten of my childhood illness. I was 5, I was very lucky. The gut stuff became irritable bowel syndrome, but for the most part wasn't a strong health problem after the surgery. I had these scars on my body, on the outside of my body, and then there were limitations and constraints I had as a child that my friends didn't have. Like I had to be careful around flashing lights, or I wasn't allowed to go to sleepovers, or around hormonal changes like my period, and if I ever chose to be pregnant, I would have to be really careful because that could trigger the seizures again. So my mom was really good about teaching me how to be mindful and how to be body aware so that to ensure the seizures didn't come back, or if they did come back, I would know I would know what it felt like, and I would know how to respond. I started to have nightmares that I was being raped every single night. In college, I was absolutely terrified to walk home between classes at night, between the church, various activities at night. I would literally run across campus because I was so afraid of being raped. And I started really avoiding and isolating because so much of collegiate life is around the party scene, which can often be very sexist. And I was super reactive and sensitive to that dynamic, and I had no idea why. I just knew like my body did not want to be in this environment. So as I continued throughout my collegiate life, I just got sicker and sicker and sicker and more debilitated until I graduated. Barely could walk across the stage. I was sleeping 14, 15 hours a day. I was absolutely exhausted. I was engaging in harmful coping mechanisms like picking and scratching at my skin. I was having a really hard time maintaining relationships because I was just so emotional and angry, but again, I just didn't know why. I started going to doctors, and they were basically telling me nothing is structurally wrong with you, so we don't know what's the matter, you should go to therapy. But therapy was stigmatized at the time, and when I finally did, I started just setting basic boundaries, right? Often in incest families, boundaries don't exist, so I had no idea what they were, and just started to learn that I didn't have to engage my father in conversation if I didn't feel that it was helpful to me, or I did to listen to my mother's emotional problems. I didn't have to be her best friend. I ended up moving away from home for graduate school. I was only about 30 minutes away from home for college, so I moved about 6 hours away driving for graduate school, and had a really strong support system. I had a really great spiritual director there who noticed that whenever I went home, I would get really sick, anxious, stressed. I was already in a state of stress. She recognized that it was exacerbated by me visiting home, so she encouraged me to stop going home. And I didn't feel that was an option. I was like, I have to go home. They're my family. What do you mean? Blood is thicker than water. This is my support system. I don't have agency around that. And she just looked at me and she said, you are an adult. You owe nothing to your family, and you don't have to go back. So I stopped going home, and within a few months, the memories resurfaced. So I started just being flooded with visual memory, what I was kind of looking for. And as soon as I had the stories of incest as well as the stories of illness, I could then go to therapists and psychiatrists and say, hey, this is my history. And they had a better understanding of why I was so debilitated. So I was being taken more seriously in medical contexts. And so I was disabled by my history and lost my family. So in the United States, right, our entire social network is built on the family system. So when that is pulled out from underneath your feet, you either have to just jump in and take care of yourself, or you need to lean on other sources of support like nonprofits or the government, systemic care, Medicare. There are no nonprofits devoted to incest survivors. There is an anti-rape movement of about 1,000 anti-rape crisis centers around the United States, but they often don't offer basic needs support. So they're not offering food stamps or housing or anything else that medical care payments. What they offer is short-term counseling, legal support, and rape test kits. Which are great programs, but generally for an incest survivor who's reclaiming their memories much later in life, it's too late for a rape test kit. Legal support is really difficult. It can be very difficult to engage the justice system as a rape survivor, especially if you're doing it years later. At the time in my own history, I had remembered too late and there were statutes of limitations. So there just was not a network that could support me. The welfare system, it's really difficult to get disability. If you have PTSD, it was even more difficult back then. I could only function about 3 hours a day. I had just lost everything. I had a lot of money in student loan debt, and that was the beginning of my adult life. I just had to figure it out. So I started engaging in all of these. I got a job as a teacher and a campus minister. I studied religion in school and just tried to get the highest paying job I could because I know within the industry I was in, because I knew that recovery would be expensive, especially then, right? Mental health really wasn't covered by insurance. I had health insurance, I had good health insurance, and still it wasn't covered. So I was paying for a lot of my services out of pocket and did a very intensive program. So in inpatient healthcare networks, right? You go to the hospital and you have a team of doctors and they're all specialists in the different areas you need support in. They all help you, and then you get treated. In an outpatient model, it's much more complex, right? I have a doctor for my brain. I have a doctor for my psychology, for my behaviors. I have a doctor for the physiological response, so my muscles and the physical therapy I had to do. I had a spiritual director, but none of them were working together because the outpatient model doesn't integrate physicians. So I was just trying to support myself through my work, manage these debilitating disabilities that I had no tools to manage on my own, make enough money to then pay to just give it to the doctors, right? Pay out of pocket for all the support I needed. And none of them could connect the dots. So I was also responsible for trying to connect all of these dots. My healing process, trying to engage medical networks, definitely helped me to function better, but I would not say it healed me. A big part of my health journey has been accepting the chronic long-term impact that my developmental trauma had on my body and my brain. So I am disabled now. I identify as disabled. I do not believe that doing more work will help me to heal. And that's a really different narrative to say, I am doing this work to manage my disabilities, not to expect myself to get better. So I was really isolated from social support for a while. And then systemic support was impossible. I did report to the police. I had a horrible experience reporting to the police. The problem with that too is because I was serially raped, which is really common for incest survivors. Often in the case of incest, the abuse happens at younger ages because people who harm have more access. It also happens more serially because they have more access. So I was abused, my family traveled a lot, and so I was abused all over the world. And yet every time I was abused, I had to report at the local precinct. So the system really isn't built for serial rape survivors, especially if that rape happened in childhood. But I went to the local precinct to say this happened numerous times in my home. My home is in this precinct. I walk in the door and I say, hey, I'm here to report child sexual abuse from years ago. And they just look at me. You can't even do that. There are statute of limitation laws. And I just broke down in tears and was like, I just was told I needed to drive all the way down here. I didn't have the money. I didn't have the funds. I didn't have the space or the time or the energy to do it. I was sacrificing in order to report. I got there and I was just denied the ability to report. So I then demanded to report. That's like part of my personality is I've been an activist all my life, maybe without an outlet, but I said I am reporting. I came here like I will be reporting today. So I waited an hour. Their actual report experience was meaningful. The officer was female, asked me a lot of wonderful questions, gave me a case number, and I never heard from them again. So I followed up a while later, and they told me that my case, there were no case notes under my file, but that I just had to trust that the police department did their job. They investigated and did their job. And I thought that was so dismissive, because I'm supposed to blindly trust my parents, who were a part of the system that harmed me. I'm supposed to blindly trust the police, who are clearly did nothing then and were doing nothing now. All of the men who harmed me are still free and able to continue to harm the next generation of children. I was supposed to kind of trust this whole network, and yet the whole network failed me. And again, was just kind of left to figure it out on my own, hold the guilt and the shame and the burden that the men that harmed me were still free to continue to abuse, to take the responsibility of healing on by myself, take the responsibility of justice on by myself. And so again, I just felt this incredible neglect that, again, I have to take this responsibility that I shouldn't have to take on to ensure that this is being paid attention to. Children are most dependent on their families, and so therefore most vulnerable within the family system, and they are not being paid attention to within this issue. So I felt this huge desire, just in very extreme feeling, that I had to share my story. I had to be more public about this issue. I had to get incest back into public discourse. So I just started a blog, just self-publishing daily, and it was really well received from my local community, which was great. It got bigger and bigger. Eventually, though, what I realized incest survivors needed more than anything was community, that we are so siloed, that we are so isolated, and that community validation is imperative to our healing process. It is through community and solidarity that they find witness, healing, and new senses of self. So we needed that for incest survivors. So suddenly my blog became a platform to build community. When I started writing my story, I felt very, very called to use the word incest. I had to use that word. It was really important to me. Eventually, we formed an alliance called Incest Aware. So now we are currently an alliance of individuals and organizations that are passionate about improving incest prevention, intervention, recovery, and justice. And we are working to ensure that we can first and foremost prevent incest from happening in the first place by not just educating children, but really educating adults and the community on systems and cycles of harm. We are working on safe intervention methods. Currently, adults have more civil rights than children do, so we can pull children out of homes and put them in foster care systems where they're 4 times more likely to be sexually abused, as opposed to pulling the person who is harmed out of the home, which would be much more traumatizing to put an adult in a hotel for a little while. And so we are working on what's called transformative justice, which suggests that everyone deserves to be raised safe, everyone deserves to be safe, and if you are exhibiting unsafe behaviors, then you need to learn to be better. So thinking really creatively about how we do not use violence, but instead use education, medicine, and research in order to help people who have harmed to be held accountable, to end recidivism, to ensure that they are not able to offend again. I feel very grateful at this stage of my life to be on the other side of what I would call my emergency recovery years, right? Where everything just felt so difficult. I would say that my healing journey was just as re-traumatizing, or my liberation journey to get out of all these systems or neglectful systems was just as re-traumatizing as the abuse itself. So now I am very grateful that, my disability is still debilitating in a lot of ways, but I am able to manage it. I have a very safe network, which I'm so grateful for, of people who love me unconditionally. My activist community is small but mighty, and we're thriving and looking to grow, which is really exciting. I often feel frustrated and behind, right? I've always been a high achieving person, so to just feel like so much of my life was slowed down throughout my recovery years was really frustrating. But I also am very grateful I'm living in a new city. I live a life that is totally different from the life that I was raised in, and feel very hopeful about the future. So my advice for any survivor, first and foremost, is to find friends. Find people who have the capacity, not necessarily to understand what you're going through, because they might not, but who can just help you to hold it. You do not have to hold this story alone. And then start engaging with research. Understand why you feel the way you feel. Go to incestaware.org. You can read my story on my website, josephineann.com. That's Anne with an E. Talking about the story itself can be really difficult for me because I remembered when I was 24. So when I recall the memories, I am remembering as an adult, not as a child. And so trying to put myself back in my child brain or my child body is really difficult. I have a level of kind of competency around my story because I remembered as an adult. I have this kind of bird's eye view. I'm looking back into my memory. I don't have as much of the embodied memory that some survivors might have who didn't forget. So I always kind of feel like when I go back into my memories, I'm hovering over my own head, right? And I'm kind of experiencing what I have learned to kind of separate or compartmentalize as this child outside of myself who experienced this, but who isn't me. And sometimes I think there is a delay in my healing because it is really hard to understand that she was me when your rational brain makes sense of the world so differently than a child's brain does. And so in my healing journey as an adult, so often I use, symbols, story, metaphor, art, because that helps her communicate to me better than I can through the research or the activism that makes more sense to my adult brain. What I have kind of uncovered throughout my healing journey is this, the dichotomy of my life at the time was that I was being abused at home and I was safe in the hospital. And so there was a relief to being in the hospital because no one could hurt me there. But it was also when I was debilitated by seizures. And so there was this weird, if I'm sick, I'm safe, but if I'm well, I'm unsafe. And so we talk about psychosomatic symptoms a lot with developmental trauma, is your brain is making your body sick and why. And I've had such a hard time in my healing journey getting over these illnesses or recovering from illness because my brain is so bound to be sick because it was the only way it felt safe. My life before I remembered the incest and before I became so debilitated by illness was seemingly very normal for the context I was raised in. I didn't understand that my father was controlling because it was normal for me. I just thought all fathers were like that. I feared my father. I really did not like to be with him most of the time. There were a few contexts I really enjoyed his company, but otherwise I didn't like to be with him. He wasn't the most verbal person, so I didn't experience verbal or other forms of domestic abuse, but there were times when he would compare how I looked to other girls in my class, or he would talk to me about how pretty the girls were in my class. When I was starting to date, he told me I couldn't date till I was 16, and then when I turned 16, he moved it out to 18. Whereas my brothers I had 3 brothers, and my oldest brother had the back seats in his car flat when he would hang out with women or other girls in our class, and my parents wouldn't say anything. So there was this huge dichotomy between how I was and expected to be as a girl in my family and who the boys were, and the boys could kind of do whatever they wanted, and I was so restricted in so many ways. But I didn't know that was wrong. I just thought it was all normal. So it wasn't until I went to school and started to meet a lot of people from a lot of different contexts, or went to college, started to meet a lot of people from a lot of different contexts, and then I started studying social justice. I started studying the powers of oppression and abuse cycles. I started studying feminism. I started studying queer ideology. And then all of a sudden it was like I could apply all that information to my childhood and be like, wow, that was so messed up. Like, I was clearly in not a safe environment. But that's one of the biggest problems with incest, is that it's hidden, right? It was hidden even from my memory. All the scars, for the most part, are generally internalized. So no one knew it was happening. So it took years and years for me to understand my household was abusive. And then when the incest memories came back, then it was very clear that my father was abusive. It took a lot longer for me to understand the complexities of covert incest, which is my mother's emotional abuse, that I was her best friend basically as young as I could be, that she leaned on me too much for emotional support, that I was the center of her identity, that when I left my family, she really blamed me. And that level of abuse was much more complex because it was trickier. Incest is so obviously abusive, but emotional abuse is so tricky. She just loved me. She just wanted to spend time with me. She just wanted to share space and listen to each other. It took me years and years to understand how she had been enabling this environment. And she's still with my father, so she knows what happened and she chose to stay with him. So after the memories came back when I was 24, I had my body led me the whole time, which was really beautiful. It was so hard because I was so debilitated. Like, my body was really shutting down. But the beauty of that was that I had no tolerance for my family's dysfunction. And so I started to isolate and find supportive community. So now I look back on those years and feel really grateful for my illness, because it was, again, such a salvific part of my journey. Was I just couldn't, it was kind of a life or death thing. It was I can continue to live in my family system and just become more and more debilitated, or I can figure out how to save my own life. And I had a very strong instinct as soon as the memories came back that I had to cut my family out and not engage with them anymore. That was the first step. And then it was just learning step by step how to do it. And it was really hard. That's something that survivors, I think it's better now, but survivors a decade ago, survivors 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, will say there was not a roadmap. It wasn't like I could go to a competent physician and they were going to tell me, okay, oh my God, I'm so sorry this happened to you. You have survived so much. You deserve to be celebrated. All of your symptoms are expected for exactly what you've been through, and we're going to teach your body to heal. That was not the narrative I was told, right? I was told I was disordered. I was told that I was a problem. I was told why I couldn't fit into all these systems. And then I was asked for a lot of money to help to start make myself normal again, right? I hit suicidal walls all the time. I was suicidal frequently throughout my healing journey because I just could not see a way out. And I'm so grateful there was just always a really kind, loving voice in my head saying, it's going to get better, it's going to get better, it's going to get better. And it is getting better, but it is such a slow process. And without the social and community support I've needed, it has been more re-traumatizing than necessary. Could have been so much easier. And I just hope to continue to create better support systems so no survivor would have had to go through what I've been through. I think that suicide is a very courageous thing, and that we most definitely should have the choice to live or die if we want that choice, and we should have safe contexts in which we can do that. But as a child and as a young adult, that did not feel to be an option for me because of kind of the moral framework of the Catholic religion. But I think more than that too, I always just had a willfulness and a belief that I could get better, that things could get better. I would say now it's difficult because I know what it's like to feel well. I have these moments throughout the day where I feel happy and satiated and loved and safe. So when I swing back into the trauma, it's so terrifying. I think now too, the more I know what it's like to feel loved and safe, the more I just always want to feel that way. And so it can be really disappointing to experience the swings, whereas in the past I just always lived in the pain. I didn't really know what it was like not to live in the pain. So it just feels like every stage of the healing journey is just difficult in a different way. And I just try to find the best tools to hold that stage and to hold myself in love in that stage. When the memories first came back, I just asked my family for space. That was my first request. I was like, I just need some space. Please don't reach out to me. And of course, because they're so codependent and enmeshed, they refused to respect my boundary. So I would get Facebook messages all the time, emails, phone calls, demanding that I reach out to people. Which is one of the ways survivors become so isolated, right? So I had to get off all my social platforms. I had to change my phone number. I wrote a letter when I was finally ready to tell my mother. I wrote a letter to her about what happened, and I sent it to her best friend because I didn't want it to arrive to my father's house where he could intercept it. And I had my mother's best friend give her the letter. I got a response from her saying, I believe you, but you need to forgive him for what he did. And forgiveness means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And so I honor that people have different definitions of it, and survivors need to do whatever is helpful for them. I am just going to say what was helpful for me because I think it is a counter narrative. I believe that forgiveness is fundamentally a part of the cycle of violence. That we do not have a system that holds people accountable for their harm. And so what we're doing is we're making this an interpersonal problem. We're saying this person abused you, and now you either need to forgive and reconnect and reconcile, which was my mother's dream, so that she could feel safe and okay, or you need to forgive and release and then go live your life, and it's not about the perpetrator, it's about you and your freedom, right? So to say that I'm supposed to just forgive and walk away doesn't actually make any sense in that context. This is not a spiritual problem, right? Like, this is a very real problem. So I believe often what forgiveness does is it asks people to recenter the perpetrator, to allow what happened to happen, and then to let it go and move on with their lives as if this is just an interpersonal issue. But it's not. This is a social issue. This is an institutional issue. We have to stop just walking away from our perpetrators, pretending like they're not gonna just go hurt other people, right? So at what point is forgiveness just another system of allowance, as opposed to saying, I am going to hold my father accountable. I'm going to ensure that people know he is an abuser. If the justice system will not do that for me, if they will not protect other children for me, even though that is my job, then I will take that on myself. And I did that by publishing my story with his name all over the media so that people knew what happened. I invented justice for myself because the justice system refused to give it to me. And it worked in a lot of ways. I have had friends call me and say, I will not let my children around your father. I have had my brother's partners find out what happened and left them because they do not want to bear children into that family system, right? Like, when the justice system fails us, we have to create our own systems of justice. When it comes to my own personal healing, I have personally found that understanding what happened, understanding the social system, the institutions, my family system. So as an adult, I think it is fundamental that we create systems of accountability. And I am frankly tired of listening to forgiveness narratives, because in a system that is so violent, in a system that has allowed violence to happen for so long, I want to hear more about how are we holding our perpetrators accountable. And that should not be on survivors, that should be on the system, but the system's not taking responsibility for it. So we have to figure out community-oriented models that say, how do we ensure that we can end recidivism? How do we ensure as a community that survivors are supported through their healing and that people who harm cannot reoffend? And forgiveness need not be a part of that conversation. And that is my very strong opinion about it. Again, survivors, you do what's best for you. That is just what was best for me.